The canyon held its breath at 3:47 hours, carved sandstone walls standing sentinel over 8 Navy SEALs who moved like shadows through the Afghan moonlight. Team leader Marcus Ghost Rodriguez pressed his back against the cold rock, hand signals cutting through darkness as his men advanced toward the compound. Intelligence had promised them a clean insertion, 48 hours of radio silence, and extraction coordinates that would never need activation. The target, Hassan al-Nasir, architect of 3 embassy bombings, sleeping soundly in a fortress that had never been breached. What they hadn't expected was the sound that shattered the pre-dawn stillness, a metallic shriek that seemed to tear reality itself apart. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon's distinctive voice erupted from somewhere impossibly high above them, its 7-barrel rotary death song echoing off canyon walls with supernatural fury. 3,000 rounds per minute of depleted uranium core ammunition painted the sky in tracers, each muzzle flash illuminating the underside of something massive and angular cutting through the stars. "What the hell?" Petty Officer Jackson's whisper died as Rodriguez's fist clenched, the universal signal for absolute silence. But silence had already fled this place, driven away by the continued hammering of ordnance that had no business existing in their carefully orchestrated operation. The SEALs pressed themselves against whatever cover they could find as spent brass rained down like metallic hail, each casing the size of a small beer bottle. The firing stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind a ringing void that felt heavier than the noise itself. Rodriguez activated his throat mic with practiced precision, his voice barely above a breath. "Overwatch, this is Ghost Team. We have unknown air support engaging targets in our AO. Request immediate clarification on friendly assets in vicinity." Static answered him, then more static. The communications specialist, Ramirez, frantically adjusted frequencies, his fingers dancing across encrypted channels with increasing desperation. Nothing. Complete radio blackout. Above them, the mysterious aircraft, whatever it was, had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. No engine noise, no navigation lights, no trace except for the smoking craters where the compound's outer defenses had been only moments before. The precision was surgical, almost artistic in its devastation. Guard towers that had stood for decades were simply gone, reduced to rubble and twisted metal. Yet the main building remained untouched, its windows still glowing with amber light. Rodriguez studied the destruction through his night vision scope, mind racing through tactical assessments. Someone had just cleared their approach with overwhelming firepower, but who? And more importantly, why weren't they on the radio acknowledging the assist? In 20 years of special operations, he had never encountered anything quite like this. The weapon's signature was familiar. A-10 Thunderbolt had to be, but the execution felt different, controlled, deliberate, personal. The mission parameters had just changed completely, and they didn't even know who had changed them. Lieutenant Commander Victoria Reaper Castellanos banked the A-10C Thunderbolt II into a climbing turn, her hands steady on the controls despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The targeting computer confirmed what her eyes had already verified: 8 thermal signatures moving with tactical precision through the canyon floor, exactly where they were supposed to be according to the classified briefing she'd received 6 hours earlier. Ghost Team was proceeding to target, unaware that their carefully planned stealth insertion had been compromised from the moment they'd stepped off the helicopter. She toggled her radio to the encrypted frequency, knowing she would receive only silence in response. The communications blackout was intentional, ordered from levels of command that existed in shadows deeper than the canyon below. Her call sign had earned its reputation through moments exactly like this, appearing when least expected, delivering death with surgical precision, then vanishing before anyone could confirm she had ever been there. "Ghost Team, be advised," she whispered into her helmet mic, though she knew they couldn't hear her. "You've got a guardian angel you never asked for." The infrared display showed heat signatures throughout the compound beginning to react to the destruction of their perimeter. Guards emerging from buildings, weapons being distributed, defensive positions being hastily established. Al-Nasir's fortress was transforming from a sleeping target into an active threat, but Victoria had anticipated this. Every move had been calculated, every contingency planned. The SEALs needed chaos to mask their approach, and she had just delivered it in the most effective way possible. Her aircraft climbed through 8,000 feet, engines whisper quiet in the thin air. The Warthog wasn't known for stealth, but Victoria had learned to make it dance in ways that defied its reputation. 15 years of flying combat missions had taught her that aircraft, like people, could exceed their design specifications when properly motivated. Tonight, motivation came from the knowledge that 8 of America's finest warriors were depending on skills she had spent her entire career perfecting. The radio crackled with distant chatter on open frequencies, Pakistani military controllers asking questions, Afghan forces requesting clarification, everyone wondering what had just happened in the mountains. But the encrypted channels remained silent, exactly as planned. Ghost Team would complete their mission believing they had operated alone, and Victoria would return to base with another successful close air support mission that officially never happened. She checked her fuel status and weapon systems, both reading optimal. The first engagement had been just the opening move in a chess game that would play out over the next several hours. Al-Nasir's compound had been surveilled for months, every patrol route memorized, every defensive weakness cataloged. But intelligence reports were static snapshots, and reality was fluid. Victoria's job was to adapt, to provide the flexibility that rigid mission planning couldn't anticipate. Below, Ghost Team had resumed their advance, moving with renewed confidence toward the main compound. They didn't know their guardian angel was circling overhead, but they could sense the tactical advantage she had provided. Sometimes the most important support came from shadows, invisible but absolutely essential. Tonight, Victoria Castellanos was that shadow, and she intended to see her warriors safely home. Rodriguez led his team through the gap where the main gate had been, his weapon sweeping methodically across angles of approach that should have been covered by sentries. The mysterious airstrike had been more than devastating. It had been intelligent, removing specific threats while leaving escape routes intact. Whoever had provided the fire support understood ground tactics at a level that suggested extensive infantry experience. This wasn't random destruction. It was battlefield architecture. The compound's interior revealed the precision of the attack even more clearly. Guard positions had been eliminated with individual cannon rounds, each impact crater perfectly placed to neutralize a defensive point without causing collateral damage to the main structure. Surveillance equipment lay in smoking ruins, but the power lines feeding the building remained intact. Someone had conducted a target analysis that bordered on the supernatural in its accuracy. "Movement, second floor," whispered Jackson, his rifle trained on a window where shadows flickered behind curtains. The building's interior lights remained on, but the patterns of movement suggested confusion rather than organized resistance. Al-Nasir's security team had been decimated in the opening seconds of the engagement, leaving only confused support staff, and perhaps the target himself. Rodriguez checked his watch. 12 minutes since the air strike, 18 minutes until their extraction window opened. The timing was still viable, but the mission had acquired variables that made him deeply uncomfortable. Professional operators didn't appreciate mysterious assistance, even when it was effective. In his experience, help that arrived without explanation usually came with costs that weren't immediately apparent. "Ramirez, keep trying to raise Overwatch," he sub-vocalized into his throat mic. "We need confirmation on that air support before we proceed to target." The communications specialist nodded, his equipment cycling through encrypted frequencies with mechanical persistence. But the radio silence continued, as complete and impenetrable as a vault door. They were operating in a communication dead zone that felt less like equipment failure and more like deliberate isolation. Above them, Victoria adjusted her flight pattern to maintain visual contact with the assault team, while staying beyond the detection envelope of any remaining air defense systems. Her passive sensors showed no active radar signatures in the area, but Afghanistan had taught every pilot to trust instinct over instruments. The mountains held secrets that technology couldn't always reveal, and tonight felt heavy with the kind of significance that left permanent marks on military careers. She watched Ghost Team breach the main building through her targeting pod's infrared camera, their movements fluid and professional despite the uncertainty that had to be eating at them. These were elite warriors, but they were operating without the complete picture, dependent on support they couldn't acknowledge or verify. Victoria understood that burden intimately. Her entire career had been built on providing critical assistance from positions of invisibility, never receiving credit, but always accepting responsibility. The radio remained silent, but her mission continued. 8 lives depended on her vigilance, and she had never failed that trust. The stairwell echoed with controlled breathing, and the soft scrape of tactical boots on concrete as Ghost Team ascended toward the second floor. Rodriguez held point, his night vision painting the world in familiar green monochrome, each step calculated to minimize noise while maintaining rapid reaction capability. Behind him, his 7-man team moved with the synchronized precision that came from hundreds of training iterations and dozens of real-world operations. The building's layout matched their intelligence briefings exactly. Main corridor running east-west, 4 rooms on each side, target location in the northeast corner suite. But intelligence briefings didn't capture the psychological atmosphere that permeated the structure. The air felt thick with tension, and the acrid smell of explosives residue that had drifted through broken windows. Somewhere in the building, people were awake and afraid. "Two tangos, end of hall," whispered Petty Officer Martinez, his voice barely audible through the team's internal communications system. Armed but not actively searching, defensive posture. Rodriguez acknowledged with a hand signal, his mind automatically calculating angles of attack, fields of fire, and potential civilian presence. The mysterious air support had eliminated external threats, but hadn't cleared the building's interior. That responsibility belonged to Ghost Team, and they would execute it with the same methodical precision that had kept them alive through 3 deployment rotations. The engagement lasted 8 seconds. 2 suppressed rifle shots, 2 controlled falls, and then silence that felt heavier than the brief violence that had preceded it. Rodriguez checked each body professionally. Both men were private security, well-armed but poorly trained. Their positions had been tactically sound for defending against a conventional assault, but inadequate against operators who moved like lethal smoke through the building's corridors. "Target room, 30 seconds," Rodriguez whispered into his throat mic, knowing that somewhere above them, their mysterious guardian angel was monitoring their progress. The thought bothered him more than he cared to admit. Professional autonomy was sacred in special operations. Unwanted assistance suggested either superior intelligence or compromised mission security. Neither possibility offered comfort. Victoria watched the thermal signatures move through the building with satisfaction that came from years of coordinating with ground forces. Ghost Team was performing exactly as she had anticipated, their tactical expertise evident in every measured advance. The building was being cleared with textbook precision, each room systematically secured before moving to the next objective. Her fuel gauge showed 70% remaining, more than adequate for the planned mission duration, but she had learned to maintain reserves for unexpected complications. Tonight felt like the kind of operation where backup plans might become primary objectives without warning. The radio silence continued to bother her, not because she needed communication, but because it suggested layers of operational complexity that hadn't been included in her briefing. The targeting pod's camera captured the moment when Rodriguez's team reached the target door. 8 figures arranging themselves with practiced efficiency, preparing for what would either be the mission's successful conclusion or the beginning of something far more complicated. Victoria adjusted her orbit to provide optimal overwatch coverage, her finger resting lightly on the cannon's trigger guard. Hassan al-Nasir woke to the sound of his bedroom door exploding inward, fragmenting into splinters that caught the amber light from his bedside lamp. He had been dreaming of childhood summers in Damascus, running through market streets with his cousins, the air heavy with cardamom and laughter. The transition from peaceful memory to present terror took several seconds to complete, his mind struggling to process the tactical lights that suddenly illuminated his room like artificial suns. Hassan al-Nasir, Rodriguez's voice cut through the darkness with mechanical precision. You are under arrest by authority of the United States military. Do not move. Do not speak. The terrorist leader found himself looking into the muzzles of 8 assault rifles, each weapon held with the steady confidence that came from absolute certainty of purpose. The men behind the guns were invisible behind night vision goggles and tactical gear, but their stillness radiated the kind of professional competence that made resistance seem not just futile but absurd. Al-Nasir's hands moved slowly above the blanket, palms visible, fingers spread. He had survived 15 years of clandestine warfare by understanding when situations offered no viable alternatives. This moment clearly fell into that category. The explosion that had awakened him 20 minutes earlier now made perfect sense. His fortress had been systematically dismantled by forces that operated beyond his understanding. "The canyon," he said quietly, his English accented but clear. "Someone was watching the canyon." Rodriguez's finger tightened fractionally on his trigger, but his voice remained steady. "Sir, you are instructed to remain silent." "She flew like a ghost," Al-Nasir continued, his eyes finding something in the darkness beyond the tactical lights. "In the old wars we called such pilots Malik al-Maut, the angel of death. I have heard that voice before in other places, other times." The terrorist's words carried an odd weight that made several team members glance at each other despite their professional discipline. There was recognition in his tone, as if the mysterious air support had been more than random tactical assistance. Al-Nasir spoke of their guardian angel with the familiarity of someone who had encountered that particular legend before. Rodriguez processed the implications while his team secured the prisoner with practiced efficiency. Plastic restraints, quick search for weapons or suicide devices, verification of identity through biometric comparison with intelligence files. Al-Nasir submitted to the procedures with the resigned dignity of someone who understood that his war had finally ended. Above them, Victoria listened to the radio chatter on open frequencies as news of the engagement began to spread through military networks. Pakistani controllers were reporting unusual aircraft activity. Afghan forces were requesting clarification on Allied operations in their sector. And somewhere in the Pentagon, duty officers were fielding questions about an A-10 that officially didn't exist in this particular airspace. She smiled behind her oxygen mask. Malik al-Maut had been her unofficial call sign during her first deployment, earned through a series of precision strikes that had seemed to materialize from empty sky. The name had followed her through 3 combat tours, spoken in whispers by both allies and enemies who had witnessed her work. Tonight, it seemed, her reputation had preceded her once again. The extraction helicopter appeared exactly on schedule, its rotors beating against the canyon walls with mechanical thunder that announced the mission's successful completion. Rodriguez's team moved with practiced efficiency, their prisoner secured and ready for transport to whatever black site facility had been designated for his interrogation. The entire operation had taken less than 40 minutes from insertion to extraction, a testament to planning, training, and the mysterious air support that had cleared their approach. As the helicopter climbed away from the canyon, Rodriguez found himself scanning the dark sky for any sign of their guardian angel. The A-10 had vanished as completely as if it had never existed, leaving behind only the evidence of its surgical precision and the terrorists' cryptic recognition. In the helicopter's cargo bay, Al-Nazir sat in restrained silence, but his eyes continued to search the darkness with something that looked like professional respect. "Ghost Lead, this is Overwatch." The radio finally crackled to life as they crossed into Pakistani airspace. "Mission complete. Proceed to designated debrief location." Rodriguez keyed his microphone. "Overwatch, Ghost Lead, requesting clarification on air support provided during target acquisition." Static answered him for several seconds before the response came. "Ghost Lead, no air support was scheduled or authorized for your mission. Recommend you include all relevant details in your after-action report." The team exchanged glances in the helicopter's dim interior. They had just completed a textbook special operations mission with the assistance of an aircraft that officially hadn't been there. The cannon rounds that had cleared their approach, the precision strikes that had neutralized defensive positions, the guardian angel that had watched over them, none of it had happened according to official records. Al-Nazir's voice cut through their contemplation, barely audible over the helicopter's engine noise. "She will come again when others need her. The angel of death does not rest while wars continue." Rodriguez wondered if the terrorist was right. Somewhere in the darkness above them, an A-10C Thunderbolt II was disappearing into the vast anonymity of military operations that existed in the spaces between official acknowledgement and necessary action. The pilot behind those controls had just saved 8 American lives with skills that bordered on the supernatural, and would receive no recognition for doing so. Above the climbing helicopter, Victoria completed her final orbit of the canyon, her cameras recording the scene for intelligence analysis that would never be officially filed. The compound lay in ruins, its defensive capabilities permanently neutralized, but the main structure remained intact enough to yield valuable intelligence about Al-Nazir's network. Her precision had been perfect, her timing flawless, her impact decisive. She banked north toward the classified airfield where her aircraft would be sanitized of any evidence linking it to the night's operation. Her flight computer showed fuel remaining within acceptable parameters, weapons expenditure within mission guidelines, and system performance nominal across all indicators. Officially, she had conducted a routine training mission over uninhabited terrain. Unofficially, she had just provided close air support to one of the most classified operations in the War on Terror. The radio remained silent as she began her approach to base, but Victoria didn't need external confirmation to know the mission had been successful. 8 thermal signatures climbing away in a helicopter told her everything she needed to know about the night's outcome. Ghost Team was safe, their target secured, their extraction completed without casualties or compromise. As her wheels touched the runway, Victoria reflected on the terrorist's words. Malik Almont, the Angel of Death. The name had followed her through a career built on moments like this, operations that existed in the shadows between official policy and necessary action. She had learned to find satisfaction in anonymity, pride in precision, and purpose in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Her ground crew approached with practiced efficiency, preparing to refuel and rearm the aircraft for whatever mission might come next. They worked in silence, understanding that some flights generated paperwork and others generated legends. Tonight's flight would be filed under routine training, but the legend of the Angel of Death had grown a little stronger. Somewhere in the Pakistani mountains, 8 Navy SEALs were beginning their journey home, carrying with them the knowledge that guardian angels existed in places where angels weren't supposed to be. And in a detention facility that didn't officially exist, Hassan al-Nazir was preparing to tell his interrogators about the ghostly aircraft that had haunted his dreams for years before finally ending his war. The morning briefing at Naval Air Station Fallon began like every other operational debrief Victoria had attended over the past 15 years. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across classified documents spread across the conference table. Coffee cups left ring stains on satellite photographs, and the air conditioning hummed with mechanical persistence that barely masked the Nevada desert heat building outside the windowless room. Commander James "Hawk" Morrison sat at the head of the table, his weathered face betraying no emotion as he reviewed the mission reports. Three other pilots occupied chairs around the room's perimeter, each representing different aspects of the previous night's operation. Victoria took her customary position near the back wall, arms crossed, expression neutral. She had learned long ago that debriefs were exercises in selective truth-telling, where successful outcomes mattered more than complete transparency. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began, his voice carrying the authority that came from 25 years of naval aviation. "Last night's operation was officially designated a training exercise. Flight records will reflect routine weapons expenditure over the Nellis Range complex. Any questions about that designation will be referred to my office." The statement carried weight that had nothing to do with rank structure. Everyone in the room understood that certain missions existed in the gray spaces between official policy and operational necessity. Victoria's A-10 had been borrowed from an Air Force unit for reasons that would never appear in any document, flown by a Navy pilot whose expertise had been requested specifically for this type of surgical precision work. "Reaper," Morrison's eyes found hers across the room, "your weapons expenditure report shows 147 rounds of 30 ammunition. Acceptable accuracy for night training conditions." Victoria nodded acknowledgement. The number was precisely accurate, each round accounted for in her post-flight inspection. What the report didn't mention was that those 147 rounds had eliminated 16 defensive positions, 3 surveillance installations, and 2 guard towers with surgical precision that had left the primary target structure completely intact. The mathematics of her accuracy were classified several levels above anyone else's clearance in the room. "GAU's team completed their training exercise successfully," Morrison continued, reading from a file that carried more classification stamps than actual text. "No casualties, objectives met within timeline parameters. The exercise demonstrated excellent coordination between air and ground assets despite communications difficulties." The euphemism was elegant in its simplicity. Communications difficulties covered the complete radio blackout that had isolated both Victoria and the SEAL team from higher command structure. The silence had been intentional, designed to provide plausible deniability for an operation that couldn't officially acknowledge the coordination between Navy SEALs and an Air Force close air support aircraft flown by a Navy pilot operating outside her service's normal command structure. Victoria's mind drifted to the moment when she had first received her assignment briefing. A colonel she had never met, in an office that wasn't marked on any base directory, had handed her a folder containing target photographs and told her that 8 American lives would depend on her ability to provide precision fire support without official authorization or communication protocols. The mission had required her to operate completely autonomous, making tactical decisions based on situational awareness rather than radio instructions. "The exercise also demonstrated," Morrison said, his eyes finding Victoria again, "the exceptional value of experienced pilots who can adapt to dynamic tactical situations. Reaper's performance last night represents the kind of operational flexibility that our military requires in an increasingly complex global environment." The praise felt hollow, not because it wasn't genuine, but because Victoria knew it would never appear in her official service record. Her personnel file would show a routine training flight, weapons expenditure within normal parameters, and satisfactory completion of assigned objectives. The reality that she had just provided close air support for one of the most sensitive special operations missions of the year would exist only in the memories of those who had been present. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah "Viper" Chen, the Air Force liaison officer assigned to coordinate inter-service operations, cleared her throat. The exercise highlighted some interesting tactical questions about autonomous close air support operations. How do we maintain command and control when communication protocols are compromised? Victoria recognized the question as an invitation to discuss the philosophical implications of what she had done the night before. Operating without radio contact, she had been forced to make targeting decisions based entirely on her own tactical assessment of the situation. Each cannon round had been her personal responsibility, each target selection her individual judgment call. "Ma'am," Victoria responded carefully, "autonomous operations require pilots who understand ground tactics as thoroughly as they understand air combat. The weapons systems are just tools. The real capability comes from experience that allows accurate threat assessment under time pressure." The answer was professionally neutral, while containing enough substance to demonstrate that she understood the broader implications of her actions. Victoria had spent years studying infantry tactics, special operations procedures, and battlefield psychology, specifically to prepare for missions like the previous night. Her expertise extended far beyond aircraft systems into the human factors that determined success or failure in combat operations. Morrison nodded approvingly. Experience and judgment remain irreplaceable assets in complex operations. Technology provides capabilities, but human decision-making provides wisdom. The briefing continued for another 30 minutes, covering fuel consumption rates, maintenance requirements, and training schedule adjustments that would accommodate future exercises of similar complexity. Victoria participated in the discussion while her mind processed the deeper implications of what had just occurred. She had been selected for this mission, not just because of her technical flying skills, but because of her reputation for making correct decisions under extreme pressure. The reputation had been built through a career that had taken her from her first combat deployment as a young lieutenant to her current position as one of the Navy's most experienced close air support pilots. Each mission had added layers to her expertise, creating the kind of operational judgment that couldn't be taught in any training program. Last night had been the culmination of that experience, a demonstration that some military capabilities existed entirely within the skills and instincts of individual warriors. As the briefing concluded and participants began to file out of the room, Morrison gestured for Victoria to remain. She waited until the door closed before approaching his position at the conference table. "Outstanding work last night," he said quietly, his official tone replaced by something that sounded more like personal respect. GAU's team's after-action report was complimentary. Victoria raised an eyebrow. She hadn't expected the SEAL team to mention her assistance in their official documentation, given the communication blackout and the classified nature of their operation. "What exactly did they report, sir?" Morrison smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. Rodriguez wrote that their mission was supported by unidentified friendly air assets demonstrating exceptional tactical awareness and precision weapons employment. He recommended that whoever provided the support receive recognition for saving American lives. The recommendation would never be processed, of course. Victoria's participation in the mission would remain classified indefinitely, buried in files that would never be opened except by historians studying declassified documents decades in the future. But Rodriguez's acknowledgement meant more than any official decoration could provide. Professional warriors understood each other across service boundaries, and his recognition carried weight that transcended formal award systems. "There's something else," Morrison continued, reaching into his briefing folder to extract a single photograph. "This was taken by a Pakistani military observer about an hour after your training flight." The image showed a section of canyon wall where someone had used white paint to create a crude but unmistakable symbol, wings surrounding a skull, with Arabic script beneath. Victoria recognized the iconography immediately. It was the informal insignia that enemy forces had created to represent her, a visual shorthand for the pilot they knew as Malik Almont. The intelligence analysis suggests this was painted by someone who survived last night's operation, Morrison explained. Someone who wanted to leave a message for other fighters about what they had witnessed. Victoria studied the photograph, understanding its implications. Her reputation had preceded her into the canyon and would follow her long after the official records had been sealed. The Angel of Death had become more than a call sign. It was a legend that existed in the spaces between military services, recognized by both allies and enemies who had experienced her precision firsthand. "Sir," she said finally, "are there any other training exercises scheduled?" Morrison's smile widened. "Reaper, I have a feeling there will be training exercises for as long as you're willing to conduct them. The world seems to generate a steady demand for your particular expertise." Victoria nodded, understanding that her career had just entered a new phase. She would continue to fly official missions for the Navy, participate in standard training programs, and maintain her service record within normal parameters. But increasingly, her most important work would exist in the shadows, providing critical support to operations that couldn't acknowledge her presence. The Angel of Death had work to do, and the war was far from over. 2 weeks after the canyon operation, Victoria found herself in the cockpit of her A-10C at 35,000 feet above the Mediterranean, officially conducting a routine transit flight from Naval Air Station Sigonella to an undisclosed forward operating base. The azure waters below stretched endlessly toward horizons that blurred the distinction between sea and sky, while her aircraft's engines hummed with the steady confidence of machinery operating within design specifications. Her flight suit bore no unit patches, no name tags, and no indication of service affiliation beyond the basic rank insignia required by international aviation law. The aircraft itself had been sanitized of all identifying marks, except for a tail number that would trace back to a maintenance depot rather than an operational squadron. Victoria had become accustomed to this institutional anonymity, understanding that her effectiveness depended largely on her ability to appear and disappear without bureaucratic fingerprints. The secure radio crackled to life with coordinates and authorization codes that would redirect her flight path toward objectives she wouldn't learn about until after landing. Someone, somewhere, had decided that a situation required her specific combination of tactical expertise and operational discretion. The request had traveled through channels that existed parallel to normal military command structures, processed by officers whose names appeared on no organizational charts. Reaper 77, proceed to alternate destination per transmitted navigation update. Weather conditions optimal, threat level minimal, expected flight time 47 minutes. Victoria acknowledged the transmission while inputting the new coordinates into her flight management system. The destination appeared to be a small island in the eastern Mediterranean, one of dozens of rocky outcroppings that dotted the sea between Turkey and Cyprus. Her intelligence briefings had mentioned several such islands as potential sites for operations that required geographic isolation and communication security. The flight path took her over waters that had witnessed thousands of years of military conflict, from ancient Greek triremes to modern missile boats. She wondered how many other pilots had flown these same routes carrying similar missions, their stories likewise destined to remain classified long after the participants had retired or died. Military aviation was filled with legends that existed only in whispered conversations between warriors who understood that some achievements could never be officially recognized. As the island came into view, Victoria could see the temporary infrastructure that marked a classified forward operating base. Prefabricated buildings arranged in defensive patterns, communications arrays disguised as commercial equipment, and a runway that appeared on no civilian aviation charts. Several aircraft were already present on the ground, their configurations suggesting a multinational operation that had been assembled for purposes that transcended traditional alliance structures. Her landing approach revealed details that confirmed the base's temporary nature. The runway had been constructed using portable materials designed for rapid deployment and extraction, and the support facilities looked more like a movie set than a permanent military installation. Everything about the place suggested that it would vanish completely within hours of mission completion, leaving behind no evidence that it had ever existed. Victoria taxied to a designated parking area where ground crews immediately began preparing her aircraft for whatever mission would come next. The personnel wore unmarked coveralls and communicated through hand signals rather than radio transmissions, maintaining operational security even in routine maintenance activities. She had learned to appreciate such attention to detail, understanding that successful covert operations depended on perfection in seemingly insignificant procedures. The base commander who met her at the aircraft was a British colonel whose accent suggested public school education and whose bearing indicated extensive special operations experience. He introduced himself only as Whitehall, which Victoria understood to be a mission designation rather than an actual name. Their conversation would be brief and focused, containing only information essential to mission success. "Reaper," he said, his voice carrying the clipped precision that British military officers used when discussing classified operations. "We have a situation developing approximately 200 nautical miles southeast of our current location. A cargo vessel has been seized by parties unknown, and conventional rescue operations would be diplomatically complicated." Victoria nodded, understanding that diplomatically complicated meant the vessel was in waters claimed by multiple nations, carrying cargo that officially didn't exist, and crewed by personnel whose rescue couldn't be acknowledged through normal channels. These situations arose regularly in the complex geopolitical environment of the Eastern Mediterranean, where commercial shipping frequently carried military supplies under civilian cover. "The vessel is the MV Constantin," Whitehall continued, consulting a tablet that displayed satellite imagery and technical specifications. "Panamanian registry, actually operated by a consortium of intelligence services for supply operations in the region. The crew includes 14 civilians and 6 military advisors whose presence cannot be officially confirmed." Victoria studied the imagery, noting the vessel's defensive positioning and the small boats that surrounded it in patterns suggesting coordinated tactical deployment. The seizure had been conducted by professionals who understood maritime operations and were prepared for extended siege conditions. This wasn't piracy in the traditional sense. It was a military operation disguised as criminal activity. "The attackers appear to be using modified fishing vessels equipped with heavy weapons," Whitehall explained, highlighting specific points on the satellite photos. "Intelligence suggests they're actually military personnel operating under non-official cover, possibly Iranian Revolutionary Guard or Syrian Special Forces. Their mission appears to be intelligence gathering rather than robbery." The implications were significant. If military personnel from a hostile nation had seized a vessel carrying classified supplies, the situation required immediate resolution before sensitive materials could be transferred to shore-based facilities. Traditional military response would trigger international incidents that could destabilize the entire region, but allowing the cargo to be compromised was equally unacceptable. "Your mission," Whitehall said, "is to provide precision fire support for a maritime rescue operation that will be conducted by personnel who cannot be officially identified. The rescue team will approach the vessel using civilian boats, and your role is to neutralize hostile forces without damaging the cargo or harming the crew." Victoria understood the challenge immediately. Maritime close air support required precision that exceeded even the standards of ground combat operations. The target vessels would be moving, the rescue team would be intermixed with hostile forces, and the margin for error would be measured in feet rather than yards. A single misplaced cannon round could sink the cargo vessel or kill the people she was trying to rescue. "Time frame?" she asked. The rescue operation begins in 2 hours, Whitehall replied. The attackers are preparing to transfer personnel and equipment to the cargo vessel, which suggests they plan to move it to a more secure location. We have one opportunity to resolve this situation before it becomes a major international crisis. Victoria nodded, her mind already beginning tactical calculations that would determine the success or failure of the mission. 200 miles of open ocean, moving targets, friendly forces intermixed with hostiles, and diplomatic requirements that made normal military procedures impossible. It was exactly the kind of challenge that had defined her entire career. The briefing room overlooked the Mediterranean through bulletproof glass that revealed the sun setting over waters that appeared deceptively peaceful. Victoria studied maritime charts while specialist personnel provided detailed intelligence about the vessel's seizure, their voices maintaining professional calm that belied the operation's complexity. Weather conditions were optimal, with minimal wind and excellent visibility, but ocean operations carried risks that no amount of planning could completely eliminate. The Constantine is carrying approximately 400 tons of mixed cargo, explained the intelligence officer, a woman whose uniform bore no identifying marks but whose briefing suggested extensive experience with maritime operations. Most of the manifest consists of legitimate commercial goods, but buried within the cargo are 47 crates of equipment that officially doesn't exist. Victoria understood the implications. 47 crates of classified military hardware were now in enemy hands, creating an intelligence catastrophe that would have repercussions throughout the region. The equipment's existence couldn't be acknowledged through diplomatic channels, which meant recovery had to be accomplished through methods that maintained plausible deniability for all parties involved. The rescue team consists of 8 personnel operating from 2 high-speed intercept boats, the briefing officer continued. They're experienced maritime operators, but they'll need air support to neutralize the hostile vessels without endangering the cargo ship's crew or compromising the sensitive materials. The tactical challenge was unprecedented in Victoria's experience. Ocean combat required different principles than ground operations, with moving platforms, three-dimensional maneuvering, and environmental factors that could change rapidly. Her A-10's cannon was designed for attacking ground targets, not engaging small boats moving at high speed across open water. "Ma'am," Victoria interrupted, "has anyone calculated the probability of collateral?